You just moved money into your emergency fund and felt something close to relief. Almost pride, like you finally did the responsible thing. 3 months of expenses, sitting there, doing nothing, and you told yourself that was the point. But somewhere underneath that, if you're honest, there's a different feeling, a quieter one. Like you built a wall around yourself and called it safety. This is about that wall. You've been told your whole life that the emergency fund is the foundation. Step 1, the non-negotiable. Before you invest, before you build, before you do anything with your money, you put 3 to 6 months in a savings account and you leave it alone. And you did it. Maybe it took years. Maybe you're still doing it. And the people who told you to do it were not wrong. Exactly. They just weren't telling you the whole story. Because here's what happens after you build the emergency fund. You build it again. The car breaks down in February and you drain half of it and then spend the next 8 months refilling it. And the whole time you're refilling it, you're not doing anything else with your money because the fund isn't where it needs to be. And then it gets there and then something happens. And then you're refilling it again. And you've been playing this game for 4, 5, 6 years and your net worth has barely moved and you can't figure out why because you're doing everything right. You have the fund, you're responsible, you're not the person who lives paycheck to paycheck. But you're also not the person who's building anything. You're just maintaining, and this is where it gets interesting. Because the emergency fund was never supposed to be the destination. It was supposed to be the floor. But somewhere along the way, for a lot of people, maybe for you, it became the ceiling. You got comfortable. The account with 3 months of expenses in it felt like security, and security felt like enough, and enough is a very dangerous place to stop. Think about the last time you had a little extra, a bonus, a tax refund. A month where everything just went right and you had money left over at the end. What did you do with it? If you're honest, not what you intended to do. What you actually did. Did it go somewhere intentional? Did it become something? Or did it just disappear, not on anything big, just on the soft accumulation of small yeses? The dinner because you deserved it, the thing you've been eyeing. The subscription you upgraded, the weekend. And then it was gone and you told yourself next time you'd be more disciplined. But this isn't about discipline, this never was. The emergency fund trap isn't that the fund is bad. It's that the fund teaches you a story about money that sounds like wisdom and functions like a cage. The story goes like this: money is for surviving. You save money so that when bad things happen, you can handle them. You protect what you have, you stay safe, and that story is not wrong. It's just incomplete because it never tells you what money is for when nothing bad is happening. It gives you a defensive relationship with your finances and no offensive one, and you can't when playing only defense. Nobody told you this part. You learned to save. You learned to cut back. You learned to have a buffer. But you were never taught what to do with money after it was safe. Because the people who taught you were also playing defense. They were children of people who lost things, jobs, houses, certainty, and what they passed down was the fear of loss, dressed up as financial advice. Keep 6 months, keep a year, don't touch it. And the fear made sense given what they'd seen. But their experience became your blueprint, even though you're living in a completely different financial landscape with different tools and different possibilities and a clock that is moving whether you use it or not. Here's what nobody tells you about money. The people who build real wealth, not income, wealth, are not the people who are the best at protecting what they have. They're the people who understood, at some point, that money sitting still is not neutral, it is losing. Not dramatically, not visibly, but constantly. Every dollar in a savings account earning 2% in a world where real costs rise at 3 or 4% is a dollar that is quietly, politely getting smaller. And you feel safe, you feel responsible, and your purchasing power is eroding like a coastline, slowly, then all at once. The emergency fund is often the first place you learned to let money sit. And sitting became comfortable, and comfortable became identity. I'm a saver. That sounds like a virtue. In certain contexts it is. But saving and building are not the same thing, and at some point in your financial life you have to make the shift from one to the other. And most people never make that shift, not because they're bad with money, because they were never told it needed to be made. And what happens next is the part most people miss. There's a specific kind of person who does everything right by conventional financial wisdom and still ends up at 60 with less than they should have. They saved, they never had credit card debt for long. They had the fund, they put money in there for a 1K up to the match. They were responsible, and they look at the number at 60 and they feel a specific kind of betrayal, not anger at themselves, just this quiet confusion, like following a recipe and somehow the dish came out wrong. They did the steps didn't work. Or they worked, but they worked slowly, partially, not the way the picture on the box promised, and this is where it gets uncomfortable, because the recipe was designed by people who had a different goal than you. The conventional financial advice you received, the emergency fund, the 6-month rule, the slow and steady, the don't take risks, that advice was designed to protect the economy from volatility, not to maximize your individual outcome. It was advice that, if everyone followed it, would keep money moving in predictable ways, keep you employed, keep you spending, keep you mildly comfortable, but never quite free. It was not designed with your finish line in mind. The wealthy don't think about money the way you were taught to think about money. They don't think in terms of safety first. They think in terms of productive deployment. Every dollar is a resource with a job. The question is never, is this safe? The question is, what is the best use of this? And sometimes the best use is liquidity. Sometimes the best use is a high-yield account. Sometimes it's an index fund or a business or an asset that pays you back. But the question is always active. What is this dollar doing? Where is it going? What is the return, not just in money, but in freedom, in time, in optionality? Most people never ask that question. Most people ask, do I have enough? And enough is a number that keeps moving. It expands to fill whatever income you have, and then a little beyond, and then you're trying to get back to even, and then you're refilling the emergency fund again, and the years pass. Here's the first principle. The emergency fund is a cost, not an asset. Every financial advisor will tell you it's the foundation. And in a narrow sense, it is, but nobody tells you the price. 3 months of expenses sitting in a savings account, let's say that's $15,000 for most people, probably more, at a high-yield savings rate of 5%, you're making $750 a year. That sounds okay until you realize that $15,000 invested in a broad index fund historically returns closer to $1,200 to $1,500 a year on average, compounded with reinvestment. And that gap might seem small in year 1. In year 10, it's a different conversation. In year 20, the person who understood that gap and made a different choice has tens of thousands more, maybe more than that, just from one decision made differently. Now, this does not mean you should liquidate your emergency fund tomorrow and put it in the market. That would be the wrong lesson, and if you're hearing that, you miss the point. The point is that your emergency fund has a cost that you were never shown. And when you understand the cost, you stop treating it as a virtue and start treating it as a tool with trade-offs. You optimize it, you might move it to a higher yield account. You might size it differently. You might build a system where you maintain liquidity, but not at the expense of growth. The people who do this well don't have less protection. They have better protection, working harder. But there's something darker underneath this. The second principle, your relationship with the emergency fund is actually a relationship with fear. Ask yourself honestly, why do you have the amount you have? Not the textbook answer. 3 to 6 months of expenses, yes. But why that number for you personally? Did you calculate it? Did you model it out? Did you think about your actual risk profile, your job security, your health, your family situation, your ability to generate income quickly if you needed to, and arrive at a precise number based on your specific reality? Or did you pick a number that felt safe, that felt like enough to quiet the anxiety? For most people, it's the second one. The emergency fund is not a financial calculation, it's an anxiety management tool. And there is nothing wrong with that. Anxiety is real and managing it is legitimate. But when your financial decisions are driven primarily by fear, you make defensive choices in every category. You don't negotiate your salary because you're grateful to have the job. You don't invest more aggressively because you might lose it. You don't start the business because what if it fails? You maintain the status quo because the status quo is known and the unknown is where the bad things live, and this is not weakness. This is the story that was handed to you and that you have been living inside without realizing it was a story. The people who actually build wealth are not less afraid. They just stopped letting fear be the decision maker. They said, I will keep enough liquid to sleep at night, and everything else will be put to work. And they did the uncomfortable thing of calculating what enough to sleep at night actually was, separate from what would make the fear completely disappear. Because the fear never completely disappears, you don't save your way out of anxiety. You think your way out of it. Let that sit for a second. Because if you've been waiting until the financial picture is clear before you get aggressive with your money, if you've been saying once the emergency fund is fully funded, then I'll invest more. Once the kids are in school, then I'll focus on this. Once things settle down, then I'll start. You have to understand that the clearance never comes. There will always be a reason to wait. The fund will always feel one emergency away from too small. And 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you'll be looking back at this exact moment as the time you had and didn't use. That's not inspiration, that's just math. Here's the third principle. Most people are optimizing for the wrong scenario. The emergency fund exists to protect you from a specific set of bad outcomes, job loss, medical bills, car breakdown, unexpected expense. And those things are real and they happen, and being able to handle them without going into debt is genuinely valuable. But ask yourself, how many of those emergencies have you actually had? In the last 5 years, how many times did you need to draw on that fund for a true emergency versus a predictable irregularity? A car you knew was aging, a home appliance that was on its last legs, a medical expense that wasn't entirely a surprise. Most emergencies are just expenses that weren't planned for. And expenses that aren't planned for are not emergencies, they're failures of anticipation. The wealthy do something different. They don't just have an emergency fund. They have a sinking fund, a deliberate allocation for predictable irregularities. Car maintenance, home repairs, medical deductibles, annual expenses. They see the expense coming and they set money aside for it before it arrives, which means the emergency fund is actually reserved for genuine catastrophe, true income loss, true crisis. Which means it can be smaller than you think. Which means more of your money can be working. And here's what that shift requires. It requires you to go from reactive to proactive in your relationship with money. From waiting for things to go wrong and then handling them, to anticipating how things will go and building the infrastructure in advance. That is a different identity. That is a person who sees their financial life as something they are designing rather than something that is happening to them. And that shift from passenger to designer is the actual work. Not the spreadsheet, not the fund size, the identity. You've heard a version of that before and you probably agreed with it intellectually and then bought something 2 days later without thinking about it. Because that's how it works. You're not weak. You're the target of extraordinarily sophisticated systems that have been optimized for decades to separate you from your money in ways that feel like your own choices. The subscription was convenient. The upgrade was reasonable. The dinner was just one dinner. The weekend was something you deserved. And none of those things were wrong. They were just expensive. And the cost wasn't the dollar amount. The cost was the compounded alternative. Every dollar you spend is not just the dollar. It's the dollar plus what that dollar would have become. At historical market returns, a dollar invested today is roughly $2 in 7 years, for dollars in 14. So when you spend $1,000 on something unmemorable, not even something bad, just something that disappeared, you're not spending $1,000. You're spending the 2 or 4,000 that thousand would have grown into. Nobody talks about it this way. Nobody shows you the actual price tag. And so you keep spending at the visible price and you wonder why the wealth isn't building. The person you envy, the one with the house, the flexibility, the whatever it is you want, they are not smarter than you. They are probably not making more money than you made at their age. What they did was understand the real price of things earlier, or someone told them, or they read it somewhere and it landed. And they made choices, not out of deprivation, but out of clarity, that you were never quite clear enough to make consistently. You're one unexpected expense away from debt not because you're irresponsible. You're one expense away because you've built a financial life with almost no margin. Every dollar has been assigned. The savings account is technically there, but it's not growing. The income comes in and it goes back out, and you're moving fast enough that it feels like progress, but if you stopped and looked at the actual trajectory, where does this path lead in 5 years, 10, 20? The picture is more uncomfortable than you let yourself see. Project it forward. If nothing changes, if you keep the same fund, the same savings rate, the same relationship with spending, the same decision-making framework, where are you at 50? At 60, not in a catastrophizing way, just in an honest, numerical way. Because the math is not cruel, it's just indifferent. It doesn't care what you intended. It doesn't care that you were busy or stressed or that the market was bad for a year or that you had a good reason. The math runs the numbers and returns the number, and the number is either the life you want or it isn't. But some people look, and when they really sit with what the trajectory actually is, something changes. Not immediately, not cleanly, but something shifts underneath. The decision-making starts to change. Not because of discipline, because the stakes became real. Because they stopped living as if they had unlimited time to get this right and started living like the clock was already running, because it is. So here's where you are. You have two paths, and neither one is comfortable, so let go of the idea that one of them is the easy option. The first path is continuation. You keep the fund where it is. You keep doing what you're doing. You get a little better in certain areas, a little worse in others. You stay roughly where you are relative to where you could be. It's not reckless. You won't necessarily fall apart. The financial anxiety doesn't get worse dramatically, it just stays, the background hum. The mild, persistent awareness that you're behind, that you should be further along, that something in the approach isn't quite right. But you know the shape of that life, it's familiar. There's something almost comforting about it. Even when it's uncomfortable, it's known. The second path is harder to describe because it's not a specific set of actions. It's a different relationship with money. It starts with an honest look at what your current strategy is actually optimized for: comfort or freedom, fear or possibility. It requires you to ask the question you've been avoiding, which is, what do I actually want? Not what should you want, not what would look responsible to someone watching. What do you actually want your life to look like, and does your financial behavior point toward that life or away from it? That question has no clean answer today. That's okay. The question is the beginning, not the destination, because the emergency fund isn't the problem. How you think about it is. How you think about money is. The story you were handed: save first, protect above all, stay safe, stay careful. That story served someone. Maybe it even served you for a while. But you're at a point where the old story has taken you as far as it can take you. And what's on the other side of it isn't recklessness. It's clarity. It's a different set of questions. It's money not as a thing to survive, but as a tool to build with. Whether you pick it up and use it that way is the only question that's left. Not if you can. You can. That part isn't actually in doubt. The question is whether you will.